site for the Facebook and make sure that it's showing the screen all right.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're ready to go.
Okay, all right, perfect. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to our Sunday program. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a very special Sunday program. Today we have guest speakers, Sister Bushra Bangee and Sister Hasna El-Nounou, who are here on behalf of MSA West. And they're going to speak to us today about overutilized and underserved, the Muslim college student crisis. For the past 40 years, MSAs and Muslim students on college campuses have faced unprecedented challenges. Many of these challenges created leaders and organizations that address needs in the community and open conversations around collective communal progress. Muslim college students have historically been a gauge of the health and challenges of the larger Muslim American community. MSA West partnered with the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, ISPU, to conduct an in-depth research on Muslim college students. Join us in this session as we go over findings from the research and engage in discourse to chart a future for young Muslims. So please welcome our guest speakers.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Should I begin? Oh, okay.
We're live.
Yes.
And then you can go ahead and go from your slides here and I'll follow.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Sister Erica, for that introduction. And thank you all for inviting us over to come to the Masjid Islamic Center, Southern California. It's been a while since I've been here, although Hasna, I know, was here just this month. And mashallah, it was really nice to come in from the parking lot into the Masjid and see all the kids playing and all the families coming together. It feels like a real community. So thank you all for allowing us to be a part of this community today. I did want to start off before we began with a few questions so that we know kind of where everyone where everyone is their familiarity with college students. So how many of you have a child that is in college? Okay, we have one. How many of you have had children that have gone to college? Okay. And how many of you have gone to college here? Okay, actually, so that's basically majority of the audience. That's good to know. So Hasna and I graduated UC Irvine about 7 years ago now. Hasna graduated UC Davis about 5 years ago now. And we have been involved in this organization called MSA West. So I'm going to go to the next slide. So MSA West was founded in 1998. So it's been around for about 25 years and has evolved into a nonprofit organization servicing over 40 college campuses throughout the state of California. Some of those campuses are also outside of the state. And it links Muslim students together to develop their potential, empowers them to be voices on campus, and then also when they enter the workforce, inshallah, too. All of our programming is student-led, and we have programming that's focused on leadership development, spirituality, civic engagement, and professional development, amongst other things that we also do. So a brief history and overview of the organization, and we want to share this just because I think it's important. I previously or I would say a couple of years ago, I also served a term on the Shura Council board. And so I've been familiar with kind of the nonprofit landscape, I would say, and in the Muslim community. And it's been really incredible to see kind of as our community matures, so do our organizations. And so similarly, MSA West, I feel like, has kind of gone in that same vein of organizations. So we were established in 1998, like I said. We held our first MSA West conference. How many of you all have heard of MSA West conference? Okay, so we only have like 2 folks. MSA West Conference is one of our flagship programs. It's it's our largest event that we host. It's student run, so it's for students by students, and it's a 3-day conference that we hold depending on where it is at a different campus every year, sometimes in Northern California, the next year Southern California, and it's for about 1,000 college students. Prior to the pandemic, we would get about 1,000 college students to come for 3 days, and they listen to Islamic talks, they listen to halal investing, they listen to a variety of different topics, and it's meant to be a real community space for Muslim college students, and also for helping them build and develop their identity as young people as well. So we hosted our first one back in 2000. Then in 2009, conversations started to begin around maybe we need to, go beyond just having a couple of events and become a nonprofit. And if we want to actually service college students, let's talk about becoming a nonprofit. So we officially became a nonprofit in 2015, and we looked at other models. So we looked at the UC Student Association, University of California Student Association. We looked at their model. We looked at the Hillel model. We looked at other communities that obviously have programs and services for their college students. And we saw, okay, what can we learn from them and what can we build off of them? Alhamdulillah, in 2017, we hired our first full-time staff member, and then we hired a second full-time staff member in 2022. So we are currently on 2 staff. So we're still very much in startup mode. And then we have just, alhamdulillah, finished our strategic plan and our restructuring, which we'll kind of get into later on in this presentation. But I wanted to give that overall context so you all are familiar with the history of the organization and kind of the history of the student landscape. So I'm going to go into this a little bit. Hasna, do you want to pass to Hasna?
All right. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Hasna El-Nounou. I'm actually one of the 2 staff members that Bushra was just mentioning. So I work full-time for the organization, which is honestly such a dream, alhamdulillah, to be able to do what you love full-time. It's definitely a blessing. So on the topic of college students, I think we're all heavily invested in, okay, well, we really care about our students. We really want to make sure that they're doing well. We want to make sure that they're resourced. But why exactly do they need community support? And for example, we talked about this actually a few weeks back when the Shura Council meeting was here. But right now, the campus climate, what's going on campuses, it's a very intense environment right now for our college students, whether they're involved in organizing around Palestine or not. So just within the last 2 months, there have been over 50 incidences of harassment, hate speech, or discrimination on California college campuses. USC, which is quite local to my understanding, it has alone had 50 incidences on their campus that have not gone reported. And the reality is that a lot of the MSAs and the SJPs that are on these campuses just within California, Northern and Southern, are doing a lot of organizing around Palestine. And with that organizing comes a lot of backlash. There comes a lot of discrimination. There are folks who unfortunately are getting followed to their cars, getting spit on, being called racial slurs. And unfortunately, our students are not reporting out of reporting fatigue, and also just the normalization of this kind of behavior. And so there's a lot of dilemmas right now, generally around Muslim college students, but college campuses in particular are especially hostile. And right now it's at an all-time high. And so not only is it coming from other students, it's also coming from professors. So at UCI, University of California, Irvine, and USC, there have been 2 professors who have been recorded to say hate speech directly to protesters for Palestine, and with very little repercussions coming from the administration, if any. And that's kind of what our campuses are looking like right now. And unfortunately, a lot of the students who are doing this organizing work are also getting doxxed or blacklisted. For those who don't know what that is, essentially it means that there are students who are, still finishing their undergraduate or graduate degree. They're involved in organizing to some extent. Maybe they're just attending a protest, and there is a Zionist individual who is taking pictures of people, recording people's names. They go and they take that student's information, they put them on some sort of anti-Semitic blacklist, aka so-and-so person is anti-Semitic. Do not hire them. Do not accept them into your institutions. And so what they try to do with that is they try to intimidate people from engaging in anything pro-Palestinian, because they recognize that students are the most vocal, but they're also the most vulnerable in terms of the early stages of their career. So oftentimes what we see is a lot of students who would like to be engaged in organizing around Palestine and other things. It's not just about Palestine. They fear the backlash and the repercussions because they are essentially the #1 targets for this very, very intense kind of backlash. So that's what's going on right now. This is not like 3 years ago, 1 year ago. This is like within the last 2 months. This is the information that we've been doing. And MSA West is at the forefront of collecting this data because we have personal relationships with all these campuses. We set up these meetings. We set up the calls, and then they also call us when they're having any really big crises. So this is coming directly from the mouths of the students themselves. And so that's kind of like what's happening right now. But back in 2019, MSA West actually conducted a very thorough research study at one of the annual conferences that Bushra had mentioned, the MSA West annual conference. At that particular year, it took place at University of California, Irvine, and we did this research in conjunction with ISPU. And we did this, I think it was in January of 2019 at the University of California, Irvine. We had over 650 survey participants, and 516 of them were completed. And the general demographic of the people who attend our conference tend to be that they are female, predominantly, born to immigrant parents, either of Arab or South Asian descent. They typically come from affluent families. They typically are practicing Muslims, and they are typically engaged in MSA or MSA West work. That is naturally who tends to attend a Muslim youth conference within the context of Southern California as a general demographic. Now, outside of that, we did have, of course, other minorities and other groups represented, but this is kind of just an idea of when you envision who's attending a conference in Southern California, this was kind of the majority. And so the results of this particular survey were very interesting for us, some of which a lot of the results we anticipated, a lot of it we did not. When it came to mental health impact, something that's very dire right now, and just recognizing this happened before the pandemic. So mental health impact, we anticipate, has gone a lot more severe since. Suicide attempts reported amongst our attendees within our affluent Arab, South Asian, female Muslim, practicing Muslim demographic. Suicide attempts were reported at 15%, 14% of all respondents. That's a very, very high percentage. And economically disadvantaged students were more likely than other participants to report attempting suicide. These are really, really, really jarring numbers that we oftentimes don't recognize as being a very big reality for our community. And these were from our very small sample size within just the conference attendees that we had. When it came to discrimination, Muslim women faced more gender-based discrimination from within the faith community. Women were reported at 63%, men were reported at 28%. This is really critical to recognize because this discrimination that the women sense or that they feel and they face shows up in a lot of the other data that came out. And then, of course, Muslim women also face more gender-based discrimination outside of the faith community, oftentimes because they're a bit more identifiably Muslim, especially if they're wearing hijab or other types of cultural clothing. So they were reported at 54%, men were reported at 26%. And then this ties also to the faith reliance aspect of the survey that we conducted. I think it's very maybe common knowledge a lot of times that young Muslim men tend to have better and closer relationships with their local imams, their local shuyukh, because they're a bit more accessible for them. They're able to go in to pray Jama'ah, or they're able to pray Isha and catch a religious scholar or leader within their community and ask the questions that they need to ask. But when it came to women, 49% of them went to their parents and their family for information, and only 7% went to a local imam, compared to the 26% of men that went to their parents and family and 21% that went to their local imam. So the accessibility that sisters in the community, young Muslim women, have to studied individuals, imams, scholars, ustads, is significantly lower. And oftentimes this correlates to either misconstrued information, culturally laced information, and maybe not the type of answers that they're seeking in times of need. And so that really does play a big role in the understanding and the maybe acceptance that they feel within their faith community. And this one was very jarring for us, especially considering what we know right now is taking place around Palestine activism. But back in 2019, 22% of all social justice advocates responded reporting to attempt suicide. 22%. That is a little bit above 1/5 of the students engaging in organizing, a little bit below 1/4%. That's a very, very high number, and this was back in 2019. And that is without the pressure that our students are currently facing right now. So we don't even know how much of an impact what's going on right now is taking on our students at the moment, and what the tolls are going to be in the weeks or months coming after. So oftentimes, and we oftentimes like to recognize that, we there is definitely a lot more engagement and action taken by young college students, but we don't always recognize the long-term impacts and the weight and the toll that it takes on them in the moment and in the years and months coming after. So this is something really critical for us to recognize as a community. And like we had mentioned before, there is definitely a little bit more of a correlation of the sisters wearing more visibly religious symbols, but the students that did wear visibly religious symbols, both the men and the women, are more likely than all others surveyed to report fearing attacks from white supremacists. 62% of them who were identifiably Muslim versus the 44 to 46% that were not. And again, this was back in 2019. Right now, the reports that we're hearing are those students that are getting followed generally are sisters who wear hijab. The ones who are getting spit on are those who are wearing kafiyas or hijabs. The ones who are getting assaulted are very recognizably Arab or Muslim. And the list goes on and on. And then lastly, when it comes to professional development, this is something that we don't oftentimes acknowledge or really talk about much in the Muslim community. We as a community, mashallah, are really, really focused on academic success and professional success, but we don't necessarily have the avenues provided to be able to equip our students with those types of opportunities to excel. And this really showed in the survey that we got from the students back in 2019. So we do have the information and the statistics kind of divided by gender, but just recognizing the patterns here that both males and females faced very similar levels or lack thereof of support for the professional development. But through large majorities of women, 84%, and men, 80%, report receiving parental support for their career choices as their main mode of support. 37% of the women and 44% of men report strongly believing that they know what career path they want to pursue after college. That's less than 50% for both. 17% of women and 34% of men say that they strongly believe they will find a satisfying job after graduation. So I want to focus in a little bit on this. Only 17% of women and 34% of men feel as though they will confidently find a job that satisfies them when they graduate down their career path. It's a very alarmingly low confidence level of having a satisfying job. And women are also half as likely as men to report having access to strong mentorship from Muslim professionals in their chosen field. 12% of women feel as though they will get proper and effective mentorship for their career versus the 24% that are male. Both of those percentages are still alarmingly low. And then similarly, economically disadvantaged respondents, as compared to wealthier respondents, are less likely to strongly agree that they will find a satisfying job after graduation. So to kind of summarize that, women and men of both socioeconomically disadvantaged and non-socioeconomically disadvantaged Muslim groups do not feel very confident that they will get a satisfying job after graduation. They do not have strong mentors that they can go to for career support. And just have resources that they feel they can rely on to be able to excel post-graduation. And then I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Bushra.
Thank you, Hasna, for that. And just to reiterate, we went over some of these major statistics because those are the ones that kind of jumped out at us. And I mentioned those because even though there are all these, issues, quote unquote, there's also, as a Muslim community, we have come a long way in the past 20 years. And we are very actually resourced. We have funding. We're just not, I would say, organized. And so a lot of the times it's more so, it's not that we don't have the ability to deal with these issues, it's that we just need to create the proper structures to be able to properly support our students. So for example, when we did our study for the strategic plan, we were looking at other models. And I'm going to talk about one of the models, which is Hillel. Hillel is an organization. Has anyone heard of Hillel? Okay, we have a few people who have heard of Hillel. Hillel is an organization that services Jewish college students. So every Jewish college student that goes into a campus, and they have they're global, mind you, they have around over 800 campuses globally. Their UCLA chapter alone has an operating budget of over $1 million. The MSA at UCLA probably has an operating budget of maybe 40 to 50,000, and that's on a higher end of an MSA. So there is a big disparity there. They also, on majority of their campuses, if they don't, they might have a physical space for Jewish students, which in that physical space, they'll provide chaplaincy support, they'll provide career services, they'll provide basic needs. Basically, it's a one-stop shop for every Jewish student to kind of go in and have all of these different resources. Similarly, they provide advocacy support and general overall wellness. When it comes to, and they have campus coordinators on each campus. So they have staff at each campus to basically act as mentors for each of their, for their students. Hillel boasts, so they brag about this, that 90% of Jewish leadership have gone through a Hillel program. So meaning that Jewish people who end up in government or in media or in some high position CEOs, they have gone through, 90% of them have gone through some sort of Hillel pipeline. They've been around for also 100 years. Hillel started literally in 1923. So this year was their 100-year anniversary. And I mention all of this because it's a good model for us to look at as what are other communities doing. Obviously, we are not going to copy paste, but it's something to look at in terms of we want to be able to provide campus support in the sense of we want to have staff at each one of our campuses. Having centers on campuses, that's a long-term vision, but having staff on our campuses, that's a 5-year vision. We can get staff at our local campuses to act as mentors. We can get career coaches at our local campuses. So after the pandemic, MSA West as a team, we kind of looked inwardly because we were starting to see a lot more issues that were coming out. A lot of the issues that Hasna was mentioning pre the pandemic seemed like they got much worse during the pandemic. Naturally, a lot of students, they didn't have access to opportunities, especially for job and internship placements, or they didn't know how to navigate systems. It was a different world, I think, for most of us. So we kind of had an internal conversation where we asked ourselves, are we properly servicing Muslim college students? And the hard answer was no, we're not. So we ended up doing our 6-month strategic plan. And we went through a variety of different exercises and we identified a new vision that we're trying to move towards. So currently, and I'm going to go into the next slide, our current services are, we have 3 major programs. So we provide ISA cohort, which stands for Islamic Sacred Activism cohort, where we train a cohort of college students in terms of how they do community organizing on their campuses. So it can be on anything. It can be on mental health. It can be on basic needs. We actually, our recent campaigns that students have been doing on college campuses has been to get Muslim mental health professionals, Muslim, culturally and religiously competent mental health professionals on their campus. We have our annual conference that I told you all about. This year, it's going to be February 2nd to 4th weekend at UC San Diego, inshallah. And then we also have a servant leadership summit where we take all the board members of the different MSAs throughout the state and we do a 3-day training weekend in Fresno. Why Fresno? Because it's central. No other reason for Fresno. And we train them on how to run their MSAs, from how to build an inclusive campus to their finances, to operations, program support, whatever crisis management, whatever they need support on, we train them. And then we build relationships with those new board members. So as they deal with issues throughout the year, we have those relationships with them to help coach them. In terms of our services, we do, like I said, MSA coaching. We do rapid response. Rapid response is basically in political times like this, when there's a lot of things happening on a college campus, we are able to come in and help guide the students on, hey, you need to reach out to CARE for this. Hey, you need to reach out to this organization for this. You should probably talk to this organization for this. We help do a lot of rapid response and trainings. We do leadership development programs, and then we do advocacy trainings. So those are all the things that we're currently doing. And we have kind of, in terms of our impact and our ability to really take students to the next level, in my opinion, we've kind of stagnated because this is something that's been going on for about 10 years now. And although it's really effective and important, it's not really getting to your average Muslim student's lived experience. So the next slide, where we go to needed services. So needed services in a perfect ideal world. So in a perfect ideal world, it would be great to have career counseling, academic support, recruiting and placement, mental health, chaplaincy, basic needs, scholarships, and early career life skills training. So like how to invest in 401k, for example, or how to set a 401k up even. What is halal investing, things like that. In an ideal world, we would want a Muslim student to be able to walk into a place on their college campus and be able to provide, get these resources. We recognize we are not there. And that is a long-term journey. So we're focusing on a few things first. So the things that we're mainly focusing on, I would say, are the things that are highlighted in or career counseling and recruiting and placement. So we recognize that professional development is become a big area. There's not really very many, if nearly no organizations in the Muslim community that are solely focused on providing professional development services for college students. And what that means is we're seeing what we call as an organization a talent drain. So you have people going into the community, going from community, so masjid going kids, going into college campus, getting jobs, and then they're out. You don't really see them until like 10 years later, maybe they have a kid and then they're like, oh shoot, I need to get back involved in the masjid. So we recognize that as a talent drain. We want to be able to help bridge that talent drain by helping people get placements into current fields and whatnot, and take those skills and bring them back to the community. So that's part one of that. Part two of that is that we live in California. California has majority of the industries in the world. It's one of the strongest economies in the world. And we have Muslims in all of those industries. Knowing that, organizing our professional base and our professional network, and being able to create placements and pipelines from college to getting employed, at whatever it may be, whether that be in tech, whether that be in entertainment, whether that be in social services, whatever that student's track is, we want to be able to help support them along those journey. So we want to pilot a professional development program to kind of identify some of those needs and then really build and scale that up. So right now we're kind of focusing on that right now. Hasna, anything to add on that point? So I think we're good on time. So with that being said, our next few steps in the next few years is to, one, we're going to be doing a rebrand of the organization. We're going to be hiring staff, because, you know, a lot, as I'm sure many of you have seen, organizations can only do so much when they have staff. And so we want to be able to pilot programs, for example, on-campus campus coordinators, professional development programs, you know, partnership programs, things of that nature, to be able to have a pipeline for our students to get to where they are, have a basic understanding, where they are successful in their careers, but also are successful in their communities. That is our ultimate goal, is to make sure that we are producing Muslims who are conscious professionals, and who are doing well in their careers and just, you know, being a part of the larger culture, but also investing in their community and taking our Muslim community to the next level as well. So that's kind of where we're at as an organization. In the meantime, we're dealing with things like this, like Hasna was mentioning, around, you know, the rapid response of dealing with Palestine advocacy and activism. And a lot of that has been difficult to manage because we're being pulled into multiple different directions. But as a community, we want to have a conversation in terms of, there are a lot of resources. Well, the reason why we have these conversations is to say, hey, we would like to invite you all to come take part of this if you're interested, and be part of our journey of building this pipeline to success for our college students. And I say this because I kind of have mentioned it multiple times throughout the presentation, but I was a student. I went through the MSA West pipeline. I've been involved in the organization for about 10 years now. And I haven't left the organization for a particular reason. And that main reason is because if we as a community can capture people between the ages of 18 and 25, then we're going to be in a very different place 10 to 15, 20 years down the line. Other communities have recognized if they invest in young people between that age of 18 to 25 or 18 to 30, then they're in a very different spot. We want our students to be able to be civically aware, be able to know how to navigate and be politically educated, as well as also be really adept in being in the professional workplace and be sought after. We want our students to be sought after, and for a Muslim professional to mean something in culture and in society. So I think that's kind of where we wanted to leave off. I wanted to open it up to any questions, or Hasna, did you have anything to add?
Maybe one point.
Yeah, go ahead.
One thing to note also, I think we talked about halal, right? And I know maybe that's a little controversial in some spaces, especially right now, but I think it's very important to us to recognize success where success exists. And one thing that we all are probably feeling and conversing about for 100% right now is, you know, the Jewish lobby and the Zionist lobby and the Jewish community as a whole is very successful. That's how they're able to, really accomplish a lot, especially when things get politically difficult in this particular moment. There is a lot of very, very powerful voices that come out of the Zionist lobby in particular. And something to recognize is that one of the main attributing factors of Hillel, for example, is that they touch 90% of Jewish students that go into any of the college campuses in the United States. And one of the most impactful messages that they make sure to really drill into their students is Zionism and the importance of Zionism and how that should always play a role in their career and how they have to give back to their community. And, we recognize Hillel is about 100 years old now. We're seeing how strong that messaging and how strong that impact is now. Right. And so we lack a similar level of training and consistency and education for our Muslim college students, because a lot of times when a Muslim college student will go into university or community college or whatever it might be, they have to choose between, do I want to seek professional development and mentorship and experience for my professional career, or do I want to choose to, invest in my my social life around Muslims and like learning more about Islam and connecting with my community? It's a split. They have to make that decision of which one am I going to go with. Typically when you find someone and you try to, as Muslim students will say, there's a lot of people who are Muslim on campus, but they would rather be a part of a professional fraternity. They'd rather be a part of, they'd rather focus their energy on a couple internships and, attend MSA and listen to the halaqah, right? And that's because they don't have a space where they can invest in both at the same time. And so that's something that is really, really critical for us to recognize. Additionally, I think as somebody who has worked in Masajid as a youth director and things of that nature, especially here in Southern California, there is a really high emphasis, and we really need to have programming and provide support and do things for our elementary through high school age students. We want to invest in them. We want to make sure they have a strong connection to the masjid, a strong connection to the deen. We want to, we'll get any money you need for the masjid, for the youth community, we'll give it. But there's a very huge drop off in that connection and that commitment from the ages of 18 and 19. When they go to college. Suddenly now it becomes the responsibility of the MSA to kind of develop their youth and like invest in the college students. We forget that they don't have money like this. They don't have support and mentorship like that. Oftentimes whoever manages to get on board for the MSA suddenly becomes like a khalifa, and anyone who has an Islamic question has to go to them. And oh no, I'm having issues with my roommates. Oh no, I'm having issues with my faith. What am I supposed to do here? How am I supposed to handle student debt? That's not things that they're prepared for. This person's maybe 19 years old. They've never had formal training like this. But subhanAllah, and they have to find how to get resources and money so that they can bring a sheikh to do a talk for 1 hour. So the weight that these students go from having, the whole community support them and provide for them without thought, to having to suddenly manage their own community is a lot of pressure. And as somebody who went through a similar pipeline, I ended up being a part of my MSA board. I ended up becoming a president. We, as an MSA in Davis, had to build a scholarship and loan fund because nobody would support the students to help them when they financially needed it. We had to start a community kitchen program because a lot of the students couldn't find halal food that was affordable. We had to hire sisters in the community and provide them with halal meat and do a program where they could do the food and so they could sell it to the students. There was absolutely no profit generation. It just kept on circulating in and out just so that there was an option for students in the community to have halal food, and many, many other things that the MSA single-handedly had to do by themselves. They were fundraising to get their own chaplain so that they could have someone to come to their events that teach Islam and counsel the students. These are 18 to 22-year-olds who are doing this. They're essentially like running a masjid or a nonprofit on their own, very little funds. They're still full-time students. They're also doing part-time jobs. They also have to do internships. By the time they finish their term, a lot of them are like, that's it, I'm done. I'm tired. I don't even want to be a part of this young professional Muslim group. I don't want to go to the masjid anymore. I don't want to be on board. I'm really exhausted. For a time being, I was very exhausted too. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me the energy to return and continue to do the work. But I would say 80% of those students, they're tapped out within 1 year, if not even less, because they have to do it all, including worrying about the finances. And so by us having this presentation and by us existing, it's a recognition that there needs to be more institutional support for these students. At 18 years old, nobody is equipped to handle all of that. They're not professionally developed and Islamically developed enough to play 15 roles at once and pursue a professional and academic education, right? And so this is a conversation of how do we create a system that works? How do we foster and invest in these skills and these talents and these individuals and protect them from the burnout and from the worst of what could come with this much responsibility, so that they're actually able to invest in the community in the long term in a healthy way that builds up our community in an effective long-term manner. And so this is not just a conversation of how do we get money to MSAs and how do we support them. This is how do we build up our masajid and our nonprofit organizations to do exceptional things within the Muslim community. And this is where we believe it starts. And so with that, I'll pass it back to Bushra, inshallah. I believe we want to open up for questions and we have about 20 minutes. So if anyone would like to ask any questions, feel free to raise your hand, but we're happy to answer them, inshallah. But jazakallah khair.
Very nice talk and very important. I also was an MSA president at UCLA many years ago. It's a lot of work, but important as well. And I like the emphasis that you put in on how this is a critical group. This 18, 22, or 24-year-old group is super important because that could have life-changing effects for them in the future. How they're advised and what their experience is like with Muslims on campus and being with people on campus. My question is this idea of Muslim chaplaincy, because that could be a central figure through which a lot of Muslims get their advice. And I know that there are some, at least private institutions, private campuses that do have full-time Muslim chaplains. Princeton, for example, or Wellesley. To know them personally, but if that is one of your, I think I saw this one of your points, and you mentioned also in your talk. Are you? How do you plan to, or is there a plan to try to get more campuses to have full-time, and how would you screen for them to make that they really are up to the job?
Yeah, I can take this one. You want to take it off? Sure. This is a really great question. And I actually think the chaplaincy piece is very critical. It's hard to find staff members and people who are mentors who also play that critical, like spiritual role for students. Something to recognize is that, mashallah, right now there does exist a chaplaincy program in Southern California that's providing for a lot of the campuses out here, and we partner with them. That's sorry, yes, the question, go ahead. No, go ahead.
The question is, how is MSA West supporting the chaplaincy wing of their activities, and how will they screen for the right Muslim chaplains that's appropriate for the campus?
Yeah, jazakallah khair. So one to kind of keep it nice and sweet and short is, mashallah, IOK, Institute of Knowledge, does provide chaplains to majority of the Southern California campuses at the moment. The reason why it's on our needed services list is because they exist in Southern California, but they do not exist in Northern California. Bushra can attest to this, mashallah. She is a product of somebody who attended a campus where they had a chaplain. So the accessibility between the students getting mentorship and support around the MSA and just like life advice was a lot more prevalent versus, like, for example, my campus where we didn't have that and we were trying to fundraise for one, right? And the development of the individual students who come out of campuses that had a chaplain is significantly higher and stronger than those who do not. Because in my campus, we were discussing what's haram and what's halal, versus within Southern California, they were like going to the chaplain, they would get advice, and they were saying, okay, the chaplain is giving us this direction, we're going to move forward with it, and we're going to put our energy into how do we solve it based on what we know we can, the parameter of this issue. So having chaplains is very critical. Now, in terms of, our role with how are we going to bring chaplains, etc., this is obviously a very long-term plan. For stage one is we want to be able to provide these services within the means that we have currently and then build out from there. The moment we're not planning on focusing on chaplaincy because it currently exists. And if we do, there's an option of either partnering with IOK or Northern California institutions And for us, we do have, I want to say, like an understanding of the type of individual that works effectively with college students. Not everyone is like the most ideal fit for chaplaincy. You know, you have to have, ideally there's somebody who was raised in the United States, who went to American campuses, who has done leadership within the capacity of like a very mixed and not in a very diverse community. You want somebody whose education, Islamic education, aligns with kind of what the students are experiencing. So there's a lot of layers to, you know, the ideal chaplain looks like this. Of course, we have limited resources sometimes in the community. You have to work with what you've got. In the meantime, you know, the chaplains that IOK is using are absolutely fantastic, mashallah. Down the road, inshallah, you know, especially if it becomes a formal partnership, or if we take that on ourselves, if we're focusing on having in-person on-campus chaplains, which is the ideal goal, especially in areas that don't have it, there would be a screening process of that nature.
Yeah, can I add on? Yeah. So thank you, Hasna, for that answer. I would also say that there needs to be more in-depth research as well, because there's two types of, I'd say, chaplains. There's an Institute of Knowledge provides like shuyukh, I would say, as their chaplains who have been trained as chaplains, versus like you said, private schools, they have chaplains that are like, I know the Yale chaplain, a couple of other, I forget, his name's Omar, I think chaplain Omar Bajwa, and there's some other chaplains that they have a more of a soft skills approach that isn't as like, I would say like fiqh, you know, focused. And I think that is worth kind of looking at. And I think, there's two-pronged, I would say the answer is two-pronged. One, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. There are organizations who are doing this. Bayan also provides chaplaincy, you know, other organizations. There's the Association of Muslim Chaplains that is a national organization. I think it requires kind of doing deep research on the different models, what's currently existing, and then seeing what partners that we can identify in Northern California and other campuses that are not being serviced, and then piloting chaplaincy programs through there. It will be obviously an iteration process as we learn, but that's how I imagine it to look like. No problem. Yes, go ahead. Oh.
Assalamu alaikum. So thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. My question really is regarding the students on campus. They are facing, you know, discrimination, retaliation, and all of that. Is there any proposal for our government officials, elected officials, to do some legislation or some resolutions? There are so many resolutions for anti-Semitism. We should have similar resolutions for Islamophobia or things like that. So any proposal or any effort in that direction?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'll pass it to Hasna, who just met with, I think, Gavin Newsom.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
So really, really timely question, alhamdulillah. So just on Friday, I was very fortunate to be amongst a group of community leaders who had a private meeting with Governor Gavin Newsom to bring up the concerns around what's going on domestic or locally in California around with the issue of Palestine, and specifically asking for a ceasefire. But, you know, they had brought MSA West on to speak specifically about what was going on college campuses. And the ask had been to put pressure on the administrations to ensure that the way that Islamophobia is addressed is equal to how anti-Semitism is addressed. And we specifically highlighted the fact that reports of anti-Semitism are seemingly increasing by stark amounts, which I'm sure is definitely true, but a lot of that is because much of the reporting is any type of pro-Palestinian protest or chant is considered anti-Semitic. Saying from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free is considered anti-Semitic, and every time that's chanted at a campus, it's considered an incident of hate speech or harassment, etc. Versus what our students are experiencing, where they're getting followed and hit and getting hit by cars. That's Allah, things of that nature, which are actual incidences, and so many of those are not being reported. So we highlighted that discrepancy for him, and he actually he mentioned, you know, everyone had spoken. Mashallah, was a very, very strong panel. It was the executive directors from CARE California, Brother Hussam Mailoush, Bassem Al-Qarra, Sheikh Alauddin Al-Bakri from Northern California, Dr. Hatem Bazian, and a few folks in the healthcare department in the field. And the first issue he addressed was the campuses. He said, you know, to the folks, to, you know, Sister Hasna, who addressed college campuses, I've had 2 meetings already with administrations for all our public and educational institutions, mentioning that there needs to be a very clear comparison, that there should be no preference of anti-Semitism over Islamophobia, because he said he recognizes the strong discrepancy. We understand a lot of that is due to funding and public pressure and pressure within their academic institutions that is very strong. So from the government level, that was the approach he took, but he did promise that he would have another meeting specifically to emphasize the data that we had shared and to make that emphasis again. Now, of course, that's not necessarily like a public policy. Sorry, that's not necessarily a public policy, but that is about as far as we're getting at the moment. And you know, public pressure is probably the most important and powerful tool that we have, right? Where we don't utilize media as much as we should. Right? Something we're telling our students when they come to us and tell us about the incidences that are happening where their administration is being very unjust towards Palestinian protesters, or, for example, University of California, Irvine, there is a Jewish student who is getting reprimanded by the university for engaging in like disrupting a campus event that was pro-Israel. Right. And they're essentially something similar to the Irvine 11, where they're trying to reprimand the students to punish them. And the university administration is not addressing things fairly for people who are pro-Palestinian. And so utilizing avenues like media, like going to the media and telling them, hey, this is what's going on, blast it, making sure all the media outlets are covering this, making sure that alumni are making letters and putting pressure on administration, making sure that, you know, we're having meetings on a government level to put pressure on not just UCI, but all public institutions of education. Things of that nature is really critical. And same thing for parents, right? Whether your student goes to university, whether you have children or not, this is something as a community that we need to really, really be pushing. And inshallah, from there, we can move forward with being able to address like larger policies. But right now, the battle is a bit more immediate. And in the long term, the game would be to really work with institutions like CARE, et cetera, to be able to push for public and state and national policies to ensure that, you know, anti-Semitism is not being defined as something that is anti-Zionist, right? Because that's currently the battle, and it's a very fresh battle. It's going very strong right now, and there's like a long game that has to be played. But yeah, so there's kind of the immediate action items, the long-term goals, inshallah, and we're in those conversations and we're working on it. But you know, make dua for the community. This is something that's a long game, so this is going to need everybody's support. But yeah, I'll pass it to Bushra.
I'll just add one point. So as Hasna said, there's actually currently an investigation going on of 4 different campuses throughout the state of California. So UCSD, UCLA, I forget the other 2 campuses. I think Stanford is one of them, and there's another public university. And the state of California is investigating them for bias on both for Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, because it's been alarmed so much. So there is like a top-down approach happening as well as a bottom-up. There needs to be a grassroots approach happening too at the same time. Like Hasna said, public pressure is equally as important, if not more. So what we are telling each campus as well is that we're saying alumni associations need to be sending alumni letters to campus administrations. Like Hasna said, in addition to that, students, when they're dealing with incidents, need to be reporting. Our students do not report, or they either don't know how to, they just feel like it's not big enough, or they're just too inundated by so many other things, they don't report. So we've been actually creating our own reporting system along with organizations like CARE and whatnot to capture just what's going on college campuses in California. And so that's one thing that we've been doing, is tracking. And then like Hasna said, with USC, there was about 50 incidents that happened just at USC. Take that to your local school newspaper, so that the school sees that, so that other students are seeing that, so that the administration says, okay, there's something that got released within the local school newspaper about this. So that's the other thing that, you know, as Hasna mentioned, there's a 2-pronged top-down and bottom-up approach that need to happen. And there was about, yeah, in the back there was questions. Assalamu alaikum.
I have 2 questions. I'll just try to ask one first. You mentioned this sort of battle, I don't know if it's a battle, the challenge of people wanting to join professional organizations versus their MSA. But we also have a lot of diversity in the community, so whether that's the different traditions, right? Sunni, Shia, Sufi, etc., or racial diversity or national diversity. So I'm curious, within either the coaching and conferences, how MSA may be supporting students in navigating diversity within our community.
Do you want to? Can I answer for initially? Okay, yeah, so thank you so much for that question. One of the things that we recognize moving forward is that right now we're primarily like the students that we've mainly been hitting are your traditional MSA student. And there are lots of students that, well, there's diversity within the MSA community, but there's also like a community that maybe isn't as engaged with the MSA. And so we recognize that there are other organizations that we should be partnering with. For example, the Afghan Student Association, is that what they're called? They provide professional development resources. We recognize that long-term, we want to also work with other campus organizations that are servicing, that have Muslim members, Muslim student members, and make sure that we are piloting these programs along with them. So that's one way of approaching that. And 100% as part of like our history of trying to do programming, recognizing ideological, sectarian, and racial diversity has been kind of a forefront conversation. Campus cultures are some of the most diverse, Muslim microcosm communities that we have, and we recognize that, and we want to make sure that our students see and have access to the same resources, so that we can also then create that same type of diversity within our masajid communities as well. So go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry. I also think, the purpose for like when we had the methodology slide, which I'll open up one more time, we make sure we address the fact that, those who the demographic that we typically hit is, the female, the born to immigrant parents of Arab or South Asian descent, etc. We recognize this, one for the purpose of the statistics, but also as a recognition that this is not the accurate representation of our Muslim community. This is who we are reaching because MSAs, unfortunately, have so limited resources and capabilities and training to be able to better serve the entire Muslim population. So when you go to a local MSA, they're going to do their best. They're going to put on some programs. They're going to go and find people that they recognize as Muslim, and they're going to invite them, etc. But again, we're talking about 18, 19, 20-year-old students who are not necessarily trained on different ethnic groups and nationalities and backgrounds and socioeconomic backgrounds and cultural differences and approaches to Islam. They're not quite sure what kind of speakers to bring and who not to bring, and what sect of Islam and how to navigate those differences. And that's a really critical piece as to why our Muslim community itself does not grow more diverse with time, because folks, sometimes the first time they ever get to engage with a Muslim population is when they go to college, because they didn't have a mosque nearby, or maybe it wasn't accessible or wasn't friendly. And so they go to college thinking that maybe they'll be able to make that kind of connection and be able to benefit from their institutions that way. But their institutions are similarly not serving them the way that it needs to be servicing them, right? And the outreach there is not strong either. They're not going out of their way to really diversify who's attending their events. They're just happy that there are people in general, right? Versus for us, we recognize that the talent drain, the talent pool is so much wider. One of the reasons maybe why, we're having typically affluent students who are attending our conferences is because it's an expensive ticket. Well, not necessarily expensive, but expensive for a student, right? Like $40 for a weekend may not be a lot to an adult, but for somebody in college who cannot afford, basic needs, it's a lot to put on for a weekend, especially if it's going to be predominantly Islamic. It's not necessarily going to focus on their professional development, etc. It's not necessarily the best investment for them, right? And so that definitely influences who attends these events, right? And we recognize that as a problem, and that's something that we're trying to address with making sure that things are providing scholarships and financial aid and trying to make sure our outreach is more intentional. But that same cognizance extends into, if we're doing professional development, our purpose for this is because you don't have to be super practicing to want professional development and mentorship. You don't have to be Arab or Desi to be wanting professional development, right? Like you're touching more people by diversifying the resources and the trainings that you're providing to students who may not be interested in attending an MSA, right? Who may feel culturally isolated in the average MSA setting on their campus. This is meant to make sure we're actually addressing the real needs of every Muslim college student, because if you're in college or if you're a young person, you're thinking about how am I going to financially sustain myself and my future family, right? That's typically where most students are aligned when they first come to university. They want to make sure that they're going to be successful. They're there to make sure that they're getting opportunities. And so for us, being able to provide these services is especially focused and centered around the fact that there is a lack of diversity and lack of connection with folks of different demographics and backgrounds from the Muslim community. And we recognize that because we see the outcome of who is coming back to the masajid, who is coming back to the community, who did we lose from the community because we did not engage them and invest in them enough when they were in university. So I'm not 100% sure if that completely addresses it, but for us, it is a priority. You know, and a part of why we're rebranding, right now we're called MSA West, right? Muslim Student Association West, essentially. And no, I mean, then MSA itself is not the only organization we're trying to service. We're trying to service the Afghan students, the Arab students, the Black students, the convert students, the Latinx students, the folks from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. Anybody who identifies as Muslim deserves to be invested in a space that is neutral, right? A space that is providing them those resources and that support, and also teaching them about Islam and bringing them closer to the deen and giving them those basic principles that while they're being professionally developed, they're also being trained about the basic tenets of our faith so that they can go into the workforce as strong, independent Muslims who have the resources to excel in fantastic ways, bring those skill sets back to the community and invest both, right? Giving them a holistic comprehensive growth. And I recognize, I apologize. I think I know you had another question. I know we have 2 minutes though, so I was going to come in at 1. Oh, sorry.
And I will say that we will be here after for answering questions as well. Yeah. Thanks, Sam.
My question is, you mentioned that you focus on 18 to 25, so I would think that your outreach is to the students on campus. Do you do any approaches to high school students, 16, 17, 18, so they can also benefit from the guidance for colleges and any internships, for instance?
Thank you for the question, brother. So right now, I would say it's actually 18 to maybe 30, just because, there's different types of students. There's students in masters, PhDs, whatnot. But the focus right now for us is to kind of make sure our scope is a little bit more defined. So we are focusing on college students. Once, if we get into a place 6, 7, 8 years down the line where we're in a good space and we feel like we're actually servicing college students in a good way, maybe we can create like a little bit of an intermediary high school track. But we've gotten this question a few times from people saying high school is really important. And we recognize it's really important, but there are other organizations already doing that work, like Minna and other organizations. So we are trying to focus on college because that right now is the ultimate need. And then, okay, just pass it to Sister Erica.
I just want to say thank you so much to our speakers for coming today. This was an excellent presentation. Jazakumullah khair. And I learned a lot today. I'm sure that all of us did. Please join us for Dhuhr prayer right now in the prayer hall. And then afterwards, we have our ice cream social in the social hall. And then at 4 p.m. today over Zoom and Facebook, YouTube, and on our website, we will have our interfaith prayer, praying for peace and justice in the Middle East and reclaiming our humanity. And that's with our Director of Religious Affairs, Sheikh Hassan Boyaksoy, Brother Salam Mariati, Dr. Lina El-Saraf, myself, and then our interfaith partners as well. So please join us. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much, Sister Erica. Thank you. Organization, your dua and the work, and thank you so much for allowing us to. Oh, that's really kind. That's really kind. Yeah, please.
Question, but so regarding halal, I see. So I mentioned it's a big factor. So are you receiving any corporate